welcome back to DejaVue.
Yeah, it's your favorite Vue podcast, and apparently you just didn't know it yet until now. Live at VueConf Toronto 2024. Nice to have you all here. And, well, we're not alone, right? My wonderful co-host, Michael Thiessen, full-time Vue instructor, had a nice talk about Nuxt layers here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And, yeah, you saw him this morning, Alex. What can I say about him? I can say a lot, actually. Nuxt core team does all these amazing things with video, content online, and consulting and all of that.
But probably most of you know it already. And of course, we could start like, yeah, let's have an hour discussion, just the two of us, but that would be a bit boring, so we thought, we want to invite some people to the stage. Some of you have seen a few people here already, probably all of them if you're here 2 days. So yeah, let's give up a big warm welcome to all of our panelists, step by step. And we're starting with the one and only Daniel Rowe, who is not only leading the Nuxt team, he's also an amazing speaker and live code. Daniel Rowe, everybody.
And next up, we've got John from the Vuetify project, component library. Here he is.
John Leider, everybody. Yeah, and our second to last panelist today, you've heard her talking about the new Nuxt SDK for Sentry. It's Sigrid Huemer, everybody. Sigrid, big applause. Come on here.
And last but certainly not least, we've got Evan, who you all know him. He's the creator of Vue. Here he is.
Evan, you. All right. Okay. And the best part is, we're not only here and thought like, okay, we prepared a big list of questions, did like a little audition, what do you have to say when? No, you all can decide what you want to ask. The people on the live stream can also just drop in some questions. So there will be a QR code visible right here in a little bit, where you can just say, okay, let's scan it. Then you come to a nice page, which is also built with Nuxt.js. And there you can go ask the questions to the panelists here. Of course, we have a few things prepared. And then we'll go through them. You can vote some other questions up, so definitely have a look there. And if you want to ask something, that's the way to go. So that will be up here for a little bit. Don't forget to check that out. And we'll get very simple started, right, Michael?
Yeah, our first question is how you got into open source. So since you're sitting right next to me, why don't you start us off, Daniel?
Okay, I said a little bit about it. I guess as a kid, I used Linux and loved the idea of stuff being open and free, and I hated stuff being closed and ecosystem locks and all of that. So Microsoft was my #1 enemy as a kid. And now I'm so delighted to use GitHub, VS Code, NPM, Playwright, and so on. So what a change in the world, I guess. And so when I had a chance to contribute back to projects I use, I tried that alongside my work. And I really loved it so much, I did it more and more. And somehow I woke up and was asked to be on a team, and then somehow I was asked to lead the team. So that's my story.
Let's see, this was 2016. Vuetify was closed source at the time. I was still working on it, and one of my coworkers I was sitting next to had seen me pull it up one day and was like, wow, that's really cool. What is that? And I told him, it was a UI library that I was working on, and he convinced me eventually to make it open source. And that's what I did December 14th that year.
Yeah, for me, since I'm developing web applications, I was using libraries that are open source. I think you all do. The first things I was doing when on GitHub was just finding out when I was using these libraries, and I could see that there was an issue with the library. I was opening an issue on GitHub. It's like the easiest thing you can do in open source. Of course, with the reproduction, very important. And then I turned Sentry at some point, and now I'm working in open source / fair source. Exactly.
All right. For me, I think I first got in touch with open source when I was still in school. I was basically teaching myself JavaScript, and then started to run into all these projects on GitHub. I think I started using GitHub when it was like 2009 or something. Like, basically, when it first came out, I started like looking at the source code on it, And in the beginning, it was just cool to see people put their code up there. And then I started learning JavaScript, started putting things on the web. I thought it's cool that I can not only share the thing I built with people through the URL, but also through the source code form. So I started just like throwing random stuff on GitHub. A lot of those in the beginning didn't really get any sort of attention at all. But then I started working on Vue in my spare time. And of course, I had to put it on GitHub. Pretty much using GitHub as, I think like in the beginning, I was just using GitHub as a way to sync between my machine at the company and the machine at home, because I didn't want to carry the machine around. So at the company, I was just like pushing stuff with GitHub. And at home, I pull it on my home machine and started doing it again. So all the code was just up there. And I didn't want to, at that time, GitHub still charged for private repositories. So I was like, I don't want to pay for that. I'll just make everything open source. Yeah, so that's how I got into it.
Well, I guess thanks GitHub in that point, and like great that we can use private repos now. There are so many nice questions out there, by the way. Keep them coming. It's really amazing. And I think that's a good point to touch on, a little sidetrack, so to say. Because, I mean, Vue started in a way as a little side project and grew into what's here right now. So the audience, at least someone out there in live stream, would want to know, what are your side projects right now? What are you working on the side when not on Vue, Sentry, Vuetify, Nuxt?
Start with me. I guess I don't really have side projects right now because I got my hands really full now, so I'm like no bandwidth for side projects for now. But my last side project was Vite, pretty much. Yeah.
Fair.
I don't have any big side projects, so it's basically just my personal website. And I mean, there is an idea I was starting with my partner together, because he's also an engineer, where we want to build like an application where you can just share pictures with each other live, like at a party, and then you have those pictures on a screen. Yeah, so that's it.
I don't really have any side projects right now. The last thing I worked on that could be considered that was earlier this year. That'd be Vuetify snips, but currently I'm pretty busy, so no side projects.
Evan saying the last side project was Vite. I mean, come on. It's really difficult when that is the first answer. My side projects, I'm building a course called React to Nuxt, and therefore I have to build a course platform as well, as probably every single person who has ever decided to create a course immediately begins by building a course platform. This is not.
I delayed mine by a few projects, actually.
Okay, so. It's not inevitable. Well, that's something I'm working on.
Somehow.
I have a game called Ostra, which I'm planning to put together and release, like a multiplayer game, a little bit like Skyjo, if you've ever played that. And then another one on a similar engine, which is a little bit like Codenames, also multiplayer. You're trying to guess a word with just one word clues from the other person, or guess lots of words. And there's one other side project I'm working on, which is quite fun, which basically is using AI to generate model embeddings for issues on GitHub, so that I can basically detect clusters of issues. So issues that are somehow in the same space as other issues. And I found it to be incredibly useful. So after starting to run this, the tool works, but I want to make it, put it hosted so it can be online and other maintainers can use it as well. And basically what it does is it'll cluster up the issues and discard the less relevant ones. It just uses, after the initial call to get the embeddings from an LLM, everything after that is just matrix maths. So it can basically calculate the distance in n-dimensional space from one issue to another issue, and then like multi-dimensionally calculate closeness of them. And so then you build the cluster around that. After I started running it on issues for Nuxt, I was able to identify so many duplicate issues, even though the words and phrasing wasn't obvious. And often if you're trying to manually identify duplicates, you start from one issue and search, and it's incredibly time consuming, whereas this detected them instantly. But it also finds the areas where there is flakiness or bad DX or a desire for improvement or an enhancement, which I find incredibly useful. So the next, I'm sorry, I'm going on, but the next step is going to be to like hook it up to other repos. For example, we'll hook it up to Rollup or Rolldown or OXC or Vite, so that when someone reports an issue in Nuxt, we can actually cluster that into a bigger ecosystem of issues that have been reported. So like if people are reporting the same issue with, I don't know, Svelte in their Vite integration or upstream in Vite, then I can pretty instantly know as a maintainer that it's not a Nuxt problem. Whereas it's one of the biggest issues that I face is that an issue comes in and I don't necessarily, it's often it's nothing to do with Nuxt, but I still have to do some investigation to find that out. So that's a sort of side project, is sort of assists me as well, but I find that side projects I enjoy most also make my life easier, so maybe it counts.
I have a quick question there, Daniel. When do you sleep? Like you listed all these things like, oh yeah, Elk and Nuxt and this and then like all these side projects. How? And you also have a family, I heard, and like friends, and you go bouldering. What's your secret? Please tell us.
It's fun. And you make time.
You heard it, right?
You make time for the things you find fun. So it's not a difficult thing.
Fair. These things spark joy, to say it with Marie Kondo's words. Perfect.
So one of our most upvoted questions here is, do you feel the imposter syndrome? And I think that's a very relevant question, especially like, you know, for all of us up on stage giving talks. I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I can speak for myself that, especially when I come to a conference like this, I was telling some other people before that I feel like I'm just a guy telling you all about the cool stuff that these people are doing. And like, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but these people do. And so in some ways, I'm always worried, like, did I just say something wrong about Nuxt layers or about Vue? And like, you know, Daniel is like cringing in the back, or Alex is gonna like, you know, pull me aside later and say, you know, you said something that was wrong, you know. And there's always like this weird like imposter syndrome. So that's my long-winded way of bringing up this question. So if anyone would like to take that, would one of you?
Well, I mean, when I first started Vuetify, it was very early into my programming career. And when it took off, it was definitely an imposter syndrome feeling. It went down over the years, but definitely for the first 4 or 5, when it first took off, yeah, it was really bad.
I can definitely say yes as well.
For me as well, yeah. It haunts me a little bit. But I was shifting my mindset a little bit about that because I think everyone in development has that. Like everyone is talking about that. And I think we can think of it like as a part of our job to always have this. Like everyone has it, this imposter syndrome, but you can still always look back on all the things you accomplished and the things you learned during your journey. Like I was developing applications in my last job. So I wasn't developing, well, is it still working? I wasn't developing SDKs. So that was new for me. And I felt like an imposter, and everything was new and like a fresh start again. But still, I could look back to what I was already working on, and I knew that I have knowledge. And all the other people have knowledge as well, but in other areas. And I can only improve from that point on. And I will always have the imposter syndrome, but it's just how development works. There will be always new things coming, and the ecosystem changes all the time. So yeah, just roll with it and talk about your feelings with other people. That always helps.
I definitely also had to some level, especially in the early days when Vue just started getting popular, and I was like, wait, like people are really comparing Vue to stuff made by Google and by Facebook. And I think to a certain point, especially in the early days, I kind of was feeling like, oh, like, you know, those folks at Google working on Angular must know what they're doing. Like these people working on React, like, you know, like they're very confident when they say we're redefining best practices. I'm like, they probably know what they're doing. But I guess like over time, interestingly, there's a lot of people who just still prefer Vue over those other solutions. I was like, maybe we got something right too, right? So it's a process of sort of, I guess one takeaway over the years is a lot of times you're presumed, you would assume a lot of sort of, in some cases maybe you think technology or people from big companies are naturally just like, they're more confident or they know better, right? But I think in a lot of cases that's not really the case, because I think ultimately technology, whether something works or not, you have to just put it to test by real developers. And if people like this stuff or they're being productive with it, they actually build great stuff with it, then the technology works. So I think like it kind of slowly changed the way for me to sort of judge whether something is good in tech or not. So a lot less based on just reputation or prior experience or anything like that, but rather more focus on the tech itself. I think that has a lot to do with it.
Could I fire in another thought here on a totally different point of view?
Sure.
That I think one of the things that gives imposter syndrome its claws to really hook into you is the fear of being found out. For sort of being unmasked as like a childhood nightmare, right? That they'll all point and laugh. They'll all realize that I was a fraud. And it's very relationship to other people. It's not like you probably wouldn't really feel the same thing if you were on your own. And that means that we all have an opportunity to make imposter syndrome less likely for the people around us. So I mean, yes, we can use all these tools for ourselves, but what about the people that look up to us? So some of the things that you can do, I think, are be vulnerable, admit when you don't know things, talk about how you learned things from other people, which is also a great way to pass on techniques to learn things, because we're all people who learn things all the time. And if you're in an environment where the people you look up to are telling you about how they are in an ongoing process of learning, or how they also, not just that they experience imposter syndrome, because you can think, well, yeah, it's fine for them to say that, but actually they can tell you, they can be vulnerable about particularly things they don't know. I think you have an opportunity to help decrease imposter syndrome in other people around you, which might not do much for you, but it will make the whole environment better.
Really good takes there, and I like the part of that imposter syndrome is, of course, part of like the social construct of relationships to people, and how especially people that are in a focus can make that easier. Just saying, okay, we all Google stuff, we all do things wrong, and that's totally fine because we're also just humans. And admitting that is a big part. I fully agree. On that note, coming from maybe it's not the full opposite, but from imposter syndrome and maybe the fear of feeling like, okay, yeah, the others did so many great things. Can I keep up with that? To big achievements. So what were, for each of you, like big achievements, maybe related to open source, to programming, jobbers, like this is maybe even the biggest achievement so far, if you can pinpoint that, if it's possible. It's like, yeah, that changed a lot, or that was a key memory, key point, turning point.
I guess for me, the success of, having, I think the key defining moment for me, especially the first one, is the first time an offline conference that's dedicated to a technology that I created was happening. And I attended there physically, and people are like coming up to me and say, hey, like, thank you for the thing you created. You really helped me. I think that was like probably the moment I felt the realest, like how the impact of something I worked on created in the real world, and like having real people telling me that. I think that's really, powerful, and kind of, it's probably the main motivation I keep doing this stuff all these years, yeah.
I'm still pretty early in my career, I would say. So my biggest achievements are all these first timers. So first time creating an SDK, first time speaking at a conference. So yeah, those are the things I'm really proud of.
I'd say mine was whenever I started getting invited to the conferences that they were having for Evan, is when I felt like there was a big change of things. So yeah.
I really struggle. I think there are lots of things that I'm really proud of, but I feel awkward saying them. I don't know, like even like in school, like I remember winning an award and for a very long time, I won an award that was this tall. So that should tell you how big a deal it was. That was a joke. And I still feel like a great deal of pride about it, but I think in the open source world, though, definitely, I was most excited when Sebastian reached out to me and basically said, I've seen what you've been doing. I really like it. Thank you so much for what you're doing. And that because I think there are a lot of other things that maybe feel more like markers on a resume, but I really felt valued, and that was a big marker for me. Maybe that's what I point out.
Michael, how about you?
Oh, my biggest achievement. Oh, I wasn't thinking that you would be asking me this, so I wasn't preparing mentally for it.
Surprise.
I don't know. I guess I would say the similar thing to Evan when I come to a conference like this and I have people come up to me and say, oh, I read that article, and because of that, I actually changed something in what I did. Not just like, oh, I liked a post or reposted it or whatever, but actually thought that it was useful enough to change my behavior or to change something that I was doing. And every single time that happens, it's kind of crazy to me that people would trust me enough to do that. So there you go. So open source is not just about like the people leading, but it's also about people contributing. In fact, probably more about the contributors and how they can help push the projects along. And the question that many of you have been asking is how to get started. How do you get into contributing to open source? And I guess you could answer this in sort of a general way or like a specific, these are the kinds of issues that might be helpful, or maybe a more philosophical approach.
So I have dealt with a lot of contributors in the past, and many of them became team members of the projects that we work on. And I think the first thing to a lot of people asking that question is you don't need permission for contribution, right? It's open source, so you can just go do a pull request whenever you want, I think. But on the other hand, I think whenever you do contribute, it's also important to sort of put yourself in the shoes of the maintainer and think about what does the project need. Like I think it's sometimes it is ideal if you can find a match between your capability and what the project need. That is the ideal situation. It doesn't necessarily always happen, and I don't think you need to force that to happen. There are many different projects. There will be some projects that suit your expertise better. Or if you really want to contribute to one, I guess you need to sort of, if you feel like, oh, I'm not good enough, I think that's not necessarily a good mindset. Like, it's more about like, oh, I want to solve this problem, but I feel like I don't know how to, so what are the exact skills I need to get better at? That's kind of a feel of self-growth in a way. But But you can also start small. For example, Matthias, who is now the core team member on Vite, started by just contributing to the documentation. I think what as maintainers, what we're really looking for is like what makes a good contributor or a good first pull request is you're showing that you have been looking at what the project is needing. Like, does the project need better documentation, or like in a lot of cases, first-time contributors are really just fixing something that a problem they've run into themselves when using the project, right? A small paper cut in the development experience. For example, the lock message could be more descriptive, and they send a pull request to improve that, and that's a really good thing, you know. And so, yeah, and that doesn't require a lot of like complicated understanding of how the whole thing works. Sometimes you can be solving a really concrete and small scope problem, and that also is a good stepping stone to getting into, you know, bigger contributions in the future and build your confidence. And ultimately, I think. Yeah, getting started can be tough, but once you've done that first step, every time you do a slightly more ambitious pull request, you eventually, you know, get recognized and maybe likely be invited to become a committer to a project.
I think the best projects to start with contributing to are the projects you're already using, because you're already familiar with them. This can be, for example, a UI library or an error monitoring library. And then when you find out there are pieces missing in the docs, because that's probably like the easiest way into contribution, you can just add those docs that are missing, or look into the issues that are tagged with good first issue. Or in October, there was the Hacktoberfest. You can also look for that tag, or just, yeah, wait for next year for Hacktoberfest and look what you can do there.
I like to encourage people for contributing to try to, most open source has like a community type area that you can go to talk about it, whether that be GitHub itself or another medium like Discord. So if you don't have a problem that you're trying to solve, another good thing you can do is look at some of the other problems that people are having and seeing if they even align with where you're working at. And then you can put some time towards something that is, I mean, that's what I did when we first started Vuetify. I just sat on, I think it was called Gitter at the time, and just listened for people to say there was bugs in the software, and then I'd fix it right then and there. So usually if you can't find a reason for your own self, like, okay, I'm not using any functionality where I need to contribute back, looking at other people's problems can help too.
I totally agree with all of that. I think, so in addendum, rather than replacing any of that, it's also, you can also totally reach out to the maintainers to ask. You really don't need permission for anything, but if you're, it can feel a bit scary to open a PR because you don't know what someone's going to say to you. Are they going to do the most awful thing that exists on GitHub, which is click the request changes button? Honestly, the level of adrenaline that goes through my body, it doesn't matter who does it. It doesn't matter what project it is. I feel personally attacked in that moment. So, like, you might be a bit worried, and there might be things that are uncertain, and you can try and decrease those uncertainties and address the worries in advance. Like with anything, any task that is daunting, anything that you can do to make it less daunting is helpful when you're taking the first step. Once you do that, it's going to get easier and easier and easier and easier, and pretty soon you're going to be telling other people how to do it. But that first time, the thing that when it feels like a cliff, if there is any way, you can make it less. And so asking on Discord, or even just saying, hey, has anyone else contributed to this project? Any tips? You know, and getting them from other contributors, or reach out to a maintainer and say, hey, I'm sorry, I was going to do this thing. I was thinking about doing it this way. Does that seem okay to you? Maintainers we're generally delighted. We're thrilled if anyone wants to contribute. It's so much. It's such a nice thing. You know, the last thing in most cases that we're going to do is come back with anything negative. So I can't speak for anybody, but definitely for the people on the stage, I could say that you know, reach out, happily ask questions, answer questions, even take a look at like I'd very happily take a look at like a pre-pull request. If you just have a commit somewhere, I can have a look and say, looks good to me, you can make the real pull request. And then that makes it a little bit less daunting. But there might be other things you can think about too. Just little by little, make it more approachable. You've got this.
Also, a few things to add there, maybe. If you find like a typo in the docs, feel free to send a PR, it's really straightforward, right? But I have at least a feeling very often if you want to solve a specific problem because, oh yeah, you took some tools or library, it didn't work as expected, maybe you want a different use case, write an issue, right? Explain not only, hey, I want to change this line because it doesn't work as it should. Explain like, okay, this is what I want to do. It doesn't work, here's an example, like reproduction, always nice, always happy about that. Because otherwise you just tell you, hey, do you have reproduction? So explain your motivation as well, and that's usually a good start because sometimes it's not a PR, sometimes it can also be like, okay, this is already possible in a different way, and it can be documentation. So save yourself also a bit of hassle. And if you say like, hey, I patched it on my own project, that's always nice to add. It's like, okay, it works in my case. It might not work in a lot of other cases because, of course, projects are very generalized, and in your case, it's great if you, disable that specific compression, but it's needed in other cases. So I think that's also a good one.
Yeah, I kind of want to add to that because contribution to an open source project isn't necessarily always code. I have a very good example. Like in the Vue project, we have a user named Skirtos, and he hasn't sent in a lot of pull requests, but his impact on the project is big because he's the kind of person who would go through a lot of like old issues or like really complicated ones where maybe has slipped through the triage process and people haven't really replied to the issue. He would like look through those and give a very detailed investigation report, kind of like not necessarily actually fixing it, but he would share as much as he found during that process. It's like, for example, like these are the relevant issues that may be connected. These are, these issues may be just because of this line of code, because of this commit, right? So any kind of that additional information that's added to an issue can, help the next maintainer who's going to work on it save a lot of time, save a lot of energy trying to just pinpoint the root cause. And he does that on many of those issues. Sometimes we can, sometimes it's just like, for me, like seeing one of his comments, I know, okay, like I have a good start on this one.
One other thing on docs, there are narratives that we sometimes accept about ourselves. When we're trying something new for the first time, we think we are imperfect, we need to improve, we're not very good at the thing. And so when when something doesn't work, we blame ourselves. I didn't do that right, it was my fault. Whereas I think often you can consider, if you're following the docs and something isn't working as expected, it is a bug in the documentation. And if you're new, you're almost one of the only people who can ever discover that bug. And so, like, I know we've been talking about docs PRs in the form of sometimes, typos and things like that. But you can also think, if you're making the documentation more intuitive, often you are fixing bugs. And there are bugs in written form. There are bugs in comprehension and intuition and DX. And that is an incredibly valuable thing. But the thing is, just don't assume you're wrong. It might be that the docs are wrong in terms of their intuitiveness.
Good points there. So yeah, a lot of things to remember, and also go for it, right? Like as was said before, nobody, don't have to ask anyone to contribute. You can do it. In terms of contribution, there is a very interesting question before we come to a few of rapid quick fires for the very end of the panel, because time's running, right? So if each of you would sit in the audience, I mean, you did, right? But like say, okay, what kind of talks would you be interested in when it comes to Vue, maybe general JavaScript? What would you be interested in hearing? That can be a specific technology, of course. It can be a specific angle, topic. So yeah, how about that?
For me now, I guess what interests me most is hearing like real stories of how people use Vue in larger projects, and specifically the challenges or the problems they run into, because that usually informs me of what we need to do next to improve. Because in a lot of cases, I guess like, because over the years we've addressed these very direct problems like user open issues that report to us, but from my experience, it's also quite different when there are a different category of problems that you run into when you are scaling the project into, a really large one. Like maybe it started small, but it's growing big, and you maintain it over time with a group of developers. So there comes a whole different category of problems that may not end up being direct issues reported, because it's not necessarily a bug, it's not necessarily a thing. Sometimes people would open RFCs or discussion issues, but hearing it in a more distilled form, as in the form of talk, would be really interesting.
Yeah, I can just follow up on that. I think that talks which elaborate on your experience in a project or in some problem are really interesting. There are just different types of talks. It can be an informative talk that goes really into deep, and also talks about experiences, and every talk is valuable.
I agree with what they said. I don't really have anything to add on that.
I really, really like deep dives into something that I might not have known otherwise. Like, what the exact thing that happens when the browser first encounters a piece of HTML, and precisely how the timings work. And for somebody to give that talk, not just as like, here's the answers, but to tell the story of how they discovered it, because often some of the things that are really interesting to hear aren't documented anywhere. There's just no answer until you actually start finding out, and being part of someone's journey as they find out or they deep dive something is great. I've heard, for example, Mark Backus has done a couple of really interesting talks on like rebuilding Vue's reactivity from scratch, which is quite fun as well, in a similar kind of way of helping you understand something in depth you might not otherwise. I also really like talks that are inspiring in the sense that they make you think outside the box and come up with some kind of, they open the horizons for you in terms of, and sometimes that's an example of what someone's done. A talk I would love to hear, a very specific one, would be an example of somebody using LLMs to create an agent that empowers them or in some way takes time off of what they're doing. That's the kind of thing that I think we're going to see more and more of, and the potential is really quite exciting. I'd love to see that talk. And, anything with a story, where it's not just facts, like not screens full of facts, but a narrative that takes you through. I want to cheer for people. I want to be heartbroken when it goes wrong. Like, that's fun. Not the heartbroken bit. The fact that it comes right in the end is the payoff.
Our next question in the Quickfire is, what is your favorite Vue feature? So we'll start with Daniel.
All the way and very quick.
Okay, Quickfire. That wasn't Quickfire, my last answer. Sorry about that.
Now,
I would say fine-grained reactivity.
I like in Vue 3 they have the new V model support for various, you can use it for whatever, it doesn't have to be just model value.
Composables.
I would say reactivity too, yeah.
Nice. Okay, then we do the other way around, so a little bit of ping pong. Options API or composition API?
Composition.
Really?
Composition.
Yeah, composition.
This isn't a question. Composition.
Next question, ref or reactive?
For what?
for when you're writing the composition API?
If I have to pick, ref.
Ref for sure, but shallow ref unless you need deep.
Ref.
Yeah, it's an easy one. Okay, let's settle the debate: tabs versus spaces.
I use spaces, but I'm fine with either, to be honest.
Tabs, because there is just one reason to prefer tabs. It's because of accessibility. If that wouldn't be the reason, I wouldn't care.
Spaces.
All my code is in spaces, but I think I'm going to have to switch to tabs.
Your favorite editor, code editor, to be specific.
VS Code.
Yeah, VS Code all the way.
WebStorm.
VS Code.
I know a lot of people were very happy that there was not only VS Code there. It's great. Okay, then let's do a few more, and then we already have to wrap it up. So, do you enjoy conferences more in person or remote?
Definitely in person.
In person.
Yeah, in person for sure.
In person.
Do you prefer rebase or merge in Git?
So,
Quickfire.
Rebase.
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 Squash that merge.
Yeah, very good. Everybody happy here, yes. All right, let's do two more. For learning, podcast, video, or blog post?
That's tough. For different occasions, I think. Yeah, podcasts are good on flights.
Blog posts.
Just a video, I think.
You said for learning, so I'm going to say blog post.
Sweet. Good mix. And the last one here, your favorite way of writing CSS?
CSS? Vanilla CSS.
Okay.
Not SAS.
But like with a framework, so like handcrafted.
I'm a fan these days of Uno. Uno CSS is pretty nice.
Since Vuetify has built-in utility classes, I'd have to say that.
Actually, just plain CSS. I'm not a fan of Tailwind so far. I don't know.
We're getting there. Yeah.
I actually like Tailwind, but I don't get to write a lot of CSS these days. So
Lucky you.
when I write small chunks of CSS, it's just style scoped, and that's it.
Okay, let's do one more thing. We just say it all together on 3. What's your favorite front-end framework? 1, 2, 3. Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the great panelists here. That was our lovely panel discussion. DejaVue, if you want to hear more of the podcast, check it out. There are weekly episodes with Michael and me. Amazing guests here. We had a few people on already, a few people coming up. So definitely check it out. And now it's, I think, time for the raffle. So thank you, everybody. One more applause. Yeah, please.